Hello and welcome to another Ourdadsstamps video. Several weeks ago I purchased a load of stamps from the Pitcairn Islands. So I thought today that would be a good topic for this video. And the more I looked into the Pitcairn Islands, the more interesting I found the place, and there's certainly a lot to talk about, so I hope you enjoy this. The Pitcairn Islands is a small island situated between New Zealand and South America in the Pacific Ocean. It's about 1,300 miles southeast of Tahiti. The most surprising thing I found about it is that the current population is just 50 people, and almost entirely made up of the direct descendants of the mutiny on HMS Bounty. The story of the mutiny on HMS Bounty is an interesting one and has been made into books and several films. It occurred in 1789. HMS Bounty had been dispatched from Great Britain to Tahiti to collect breadfruit plants. But shortly on the return journey, many of the crew got fed up with the captain, Captain Bligh's very strict and often brutal treatment. And many of the crew, led by Fletcher Christian, forced the captain and some of his supporters into a longboat and took control of HMS Bounty, and then sailed to several islands before ending up in the Pitcairn Islands, which at the time were uninhabited. And the reason they chose this island was because they needed to hide from the British, because in those days mutiny was punishable by death. They remained there undiscovered for over 20 years, by which time many of the crew had died. But a colony was established, and the population numbers have always been relatively low, as it's quite a small island, but peaked at 233 in 1937. But as I said, now it's only 50 people. The first stamps on Pitcairn were not produced until 1940. And the set featured the image of King George VI, but with many references to the original settlers. With a population of only 50, you may wonder why so many stamps are produced in the Pitcairn Islands. But it's actually one of their major sources of revenue, and they are printed and designed mainly to sell to stamp collectors. Originally in the 19th century, any post that needed to be sent was done by chance, and it was only collected if and when a ship passing by stopped at the island. But in 1920, a regular mail service was introduced. There were no stamps produced in the Pitcairn Islands, so these letters were allowed free of charge as long as they carried a cachet indicating that their origin was in the Pitcairn Islands. And then in 1926, the New Zealand government withdrew the free postage concession, and all posts carried New Zealand stamps with a Pitcairn Island cancellation. These stamps are much more valuable than standard New Zealand stamp. So if you have a load of New Zealand stamps from the 20s, 30s, have a close look, see if they've franked with the Pitcairn Islands postmark. It could be quite valuable. I came across one of these covers in the collection that I bought, and it has a very interesting story to it. It was not until 1938 that the islanders got fully in touch with the rest of the world, and this was due to a small group of amateur radio enthusiasts who managed to get enough money and enough equipment to set up a permanent radio station on Pitcairn. Two of these enthusiasts rather cleverly produced an illustrated cover to commemorate the occasion. These were Lewis Bellum and Grenville Lindsay, and they produced a cover with an illustration of the house from which the radio station was broadcast. It's thought that about 2,000 of these covers were produced and sent to stamp collectors around the world. They used the 1 penny or 2 halfpenny New Zealand stamps at the time. and they carried a special Pitcairn Island radio communication hand stamp of March the 18th, 1938 in blue ink, as you can see on this copy. The covers were sent out in mailbags with the island supply boat, but it appears that the boat became swamped in rough seas and lost its cargo overboard. And of the 3 mailbags, only 2 of them were recovered, and they were returned to the island for drying out. A few of the covers were stamped with a cachet saying "salvaged at sea by the schooner Mary Jane," and it's thought that only 6 of these covers survive, so they are particularly valuable. Now, the cover I've got looks to have water damage, so it may well be one of the original ones. However, there is another story to this where the remaining covers were stored in the basement of a stamp shop in America, and a hurricane caused this to be flooded, so they had water damage as well. Anyway, it's an interesting story, and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with this cover yet, particularly as this one appears to be signed by Lewis Bellum. I don't know how many of those he did sign, but that certainly makes this one a bit special. As I said, the Pitcairn Islands produce many sets of stamps now, and these are largely sold to collectors and bring money into the island, much needed money into the island. As a crown colony, they all generally contain an image of the current monarch and the usual omnibus editions of George VI Silver Jubilee, the Victory stamps, the UPU, etc., have all been produced in the Pitcairn Islands. The 1964 Queen Elizabeth set shows many of the island's birds, and it's quite a nice set and goes up to 8 shillings. Not particularly valuable, but nice to get hold of and nice to look at. And in 1967 the country changed to decimal currency, and these stamps were overprinted with the new decimal values. As you would expect, there are many sets of stamps depicting the unusual history of the island. There's a set produced in 1969 which shows views of the island and artifacts from HMS Bounty, and this set runs from 1 cent up to $1, and the complete set mint only catalogues at £25, so it's quite reasonable to get hold of. Between 1989 and 1991 there were 5 different mini sheets produced celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Pitcairn Island settlement, and these mini sheets not only have the stamps on them, but in between the stamps they have a little story about exactly what happened. So if you're interested in knowing the story behind the mutiny on the Bounty and how Pitcairn Islands came to be settled, then it's worth looking at these mini sheets and having a read of them. As you would expect, there's lots and lots of royalty themed sets and stamps from the Pitcairn Islands, and these are very popular, so you can understand why they've printed these. There's also lots of sets about the wildlife of Pitcairn, the birds, the fish, the animals, as well as the plants. And ones I particularly like, in 1984 there was a set of local fish, and eventually there were 15 stamps in this set which range from 1 cent to $3, and they're well worth collecting. They look very nice. Like most of the stamps from the Pitcairn Islands, they are not hugely valuable or hugely expensive to buy, so it's certainly ones that can be added to your collection easily. And on the subject of nature, in 1995 there was also another nice set of the birds of the island, and again there's a set of 12 stamps which range from 5 cents up to $5 and well worth a look. Another thematic to look out for is, naturally enough, ships. And in 1988 they produced a set of 10 stamps which range from 5 cents to $5, and once again these are well worth looking at and not expensive to buy. So I hope you enjoyed this little roundup of the Pitcairn Islands. A nice lot of stamps there, but also a fascinating history of the island. And if you want to help the islanders continue to live there, then buy some of their stamps, because it goes as revenue towards the islanders. Thank you for watching. The making of this video has certainly piqued my interest about small islands. And I think maybe over the next few months I'm going to do some more videos with particular reference to the small islands that produce stamps. So watch this space.